The year was 1958. Harlem was his. Not because he owned it on paper, because everyone who breathed there understood what happened when you forgot. BumpyJohnson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Italians controlled Manhattan below 110th Street. They had the docks, the unions, the politicians. But Harlem was different, and they wanted in. Not through negotiation, through pressure. They thought if they touched what he loved, he'd bend. They were wrong. It started on a Tuesday. His daughter was walking home from school. She was 12. Two men followed her for 3 blocks. They didn't touch her. They didn't say a word. They just followed. Close enough that she could hear their footsteps. Close enough that she turned around twice. By the time she got home, she was crying. Bumpy listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there, still as stone, while she told him what happened. When she finished, he nodded once. Then he kissed her forehead and told her to go to her room. She never saw him angry. That was the point. The men who followed her worked for a capo named Sal Triano. Triano ran numbers in the Bronx and had been pushing into Harlem for months. Small things at first. A loan here, a shakedown there. Testing the borders. Seeing how far he could go before someone pushed back. Bumpy had ignored it. Not because he was weak. Because wars cost money. And bodies. And attention from people who shouldn't be paying attention.
But this was different. This wasn't business. This was a message. And messages required answers. Triano wasn't acting alone. He was a soldier. A mid-level operator with ambition and no sense. Behind him was a man named Vincent Gigante. Everyone called him Chin. Chin was careful. He was patient. He understood that Harlem was valuable not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. A gap in the family's control. A neighborhood generating millions in untaxed revenue. Money that didn't flow through their hands. And that was unacceptable. Chin had been watching Bumpy for years. He respected him. But respect didn't mean partnership. It meant waiting for the right moment to move. And Triano's play, as reckless as it was, gave him that moment. If Bumpy reacted with violence, Chin could justify a full-scale response. If Bumpy did nothing, Chin could claim Harlem was open territory. Either way, Chin won. Or so he thought. Bumpy made a phone call. One call. He didn't yell into the receiver. He didn't threaten. He just said a name. Sal Triano. Then he hung up. The man on the other end was someone who owed Bumpy a favor so old that most people had forgotten it existed. But Bumpy never forgot, and neither did the man on the phone. His name was Frank Costello. Frank was royalty, the prime minister of the underworld. He had survived more wars than most men had fought, and he knew one thing better than anyone else, that respect, real respect, wasn't taken. It was earned over decades. Bumpy had earned it, not by kissing rings or bowing to bosses, but by keeping Harlem stable when every other neighborhood was tearing itself apart, by never letting drugs touch the schools, by making sure the money flowed, but the chaos didn't.
Frank didn't like what he heard. Not because he cared about Bumpy's daughter, but because Triano's move was sloppy. It threatened the balance, and balance was everything. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. Triano kept running his operation. He even laughed about it at a card game in Little Italy. Told his crew that Bumpy was getting soft, that Harlem was wide open now, that the old man didn't have it anymore. His crew laughed with him. They drank. They played cards. They talked about expansion like it was already done. One of them, a young guy named Paulie, asked what would happen if Bumpy did come back. Triano leaned back in his chair, smiled, said that Bumpy was a relic, a legend from another time, and legends didn't last in the real world. But while Triano was talking, Bumpy was moving, quietly, not with soldiers, not with guns, with information. He spent those 3 days learning everything, where Triano ate, where he slept, who he trusted, who he owed, where his money was, where his family lived. Bumpy didn't need to use any of it. He just needed to know it. Because power isn't about what you do. It's about what you could do, and making sure the other person knows it too. On Friday night, Triano left a social club on Mulberry Street. He walked to his car alone. He always walked alone. It was part of his image. Fearless, untouchable. He opened the driver's side door. Bumpy was sitting in the back seat. Triano froze. Not because he saw a gun. There was no gun. Bumpy was just sitting there, hands folded, calm. Triano's first instinct was to run, but his legs didn't move. His crew was 50 feet away, inside the club. He could have yelled, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in Bumpy's eyes. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the realization that if Bumpy wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. Bumpy spoke quietly. He said one sentence. "You followed my daughter." Triano tried to explain. He said it wasn't personal, that it was just business.
That he was trying to open a dialogue, that he didn't know she was Bumpy's daughter. That last part was a lie, and they both knew it. Bumpy didn't respond. He just stared. And in that silence, Triano understood something. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a sentencing. Bumpy leaned forward. Still no weapon, still no raised voice. He told Triano that he had 48 hours, not to leave town, not to apologize, to close every operation he had north of 110th Street. Every loan, every bet, every connection. Gone. And if he ever saw one of Triano's men in Harlem again, the next conversation wouldn't be in a car. It would be in a hospital or a morgue. Triano started to speak. Bumpy raised one finger. Just one. And Triano went silent. Bumpy told him something else. He said that he knew about Chin, that he knew this wasn't Triano's idea, that he knew Triano was just a piece being moved on a board, but pieces that moved wrong got removed, and Triano had moved wrong. Then Bumpy said something that made Triano's blood turn cold. He said that Frank Costello had already made a call, that Chin had been told to pull back, that this conversation was a courtesy, a chance for Triano to fix his mistake before it became permanent. Triano didn't ask how Bumpy knew. He didn't ask what Frank said. He just nodded. Bumpy got out of the car. He walked away, slowly. No rush, no looking back. Just a man taking a walk on a Friday night. Triano sat there for 20 minutes before his hand stopped shaking. When he finally went back inside the club, his crew asked what took so long. He said he had to make a call. They didn't push. Something in his face told them not to. By Monday, every Italian operation in Harlem was shut down. Triano didn't just pull back. He disappeared. Moved to Florida 6 months later. Never came back. The men who followed Bumpy's daughter were found working in a fish market in Brooklyn. They never said what happened to them, but they never looked anyone in the eye again. One of them, the younger one, quit after 2 weeks and moved back to Sicily. He told his family he didn't feel safe in America anymore.
Word spread fast. Not because Bumpy told the story, he never did, but people talk, especially in that world where reputation is currency and currency is survival. The story changed depending on who told it. Some said Bumpy put a knife to Triano's throat. Some said he had 10 men waiting outside the club. Some said he made Triano beg. None of it was true, but the truth didn't matter. The message did, and the message was clear.
You could test Bumpy's patience in business. You could push on his territory. You could even try to undercut his prices. But you didn't touch his family. Because when you did, you didn't get a war. You got erased. Quietly, completely, without a single shot fired. But the story didn't end there, because Chin wasn't like Triano. Chin didn't panic. Chin didn't run. He watched. He learned. And he filed the information away for later. 2 weeks after the incident, Chin requested a sit-down. Not with Bumpy, with Frank Costello. They met in a restaurant in the village. No bodyguards, no witnesses, just 2 men talking over dinner. Chin asked Frank why he interfered. Frank said he didn't interfere. He said he corrected a mistake. Chin asked what mistake. Frank told him that moving on Bumpy's family wasn't strategy, it was stupidity. That Harlem had been stable for a decade because Bumpy kept it stable. That stability made everyone money, and threatening that stability over ambition was bad business. Chin listened. He didn't argue. He didn't push back. He just nodded. And then he said something that Frank remembered for years. He said that Bumpy was smart, that he respected that. But respect didn't mean forever, and forever was a long time. Frank smiled. He said that Chin was right. Forever was a long time.
But so was today. And today, Bumpy was untouchable. Chin didn't smile back. He just finished his meal, paid the bill, and left. Frank never told Bumpy about that conversation. He didn't need to. Bumpy already knew. Because men like Bumpy didn't survive by reacting. They survived by anticipating, by understanding that every move had a countermove, and every countermove had a cost. Chin's cost was time. He had to wait. And waiting, in that world, was the hardest thing to do. Because while you waited, your enemies got stronger, your allies got impatient, and opportunities disappeared. But Chin was patient. He waited years.
And when he finally moved, it wasn't against Bumpy. It was around him. Because he learned something that night in the car. That you don't fight legends, you outlast them. But that's a different story. For now, what mattered was what happened in 1958, when a man sat in the back seat of a car and changed the rules without firing a shot. When fear became a weapon more powerful than any gun. When respect was enforced not through violence, but through presence. Bumpy went home that night. He kissed his daughter goodnight. He sat in his study.
He didn't celebrate. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there, thinking. Because he knew something most people didn't. That victories weren't permanent. They were just delays. And every delay required maintenance. His wife asked him if everything was okay. He said it was. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. Because she knew that the weight he carried wasn't something you talked about. It was something you lived with. Every day, every decision, every threat. It never went away. It just got heavier. The next morning, Bumpy went to a barber shop on 125th Street. Same shop he'd been going to for 20 years. Same chair, same barber. The barber didn't ask him about what happened. Nobody did. Because in Harlem, you didn't ask BumpyJohnson about his business. You just knew that when things needed handling, they got handled. And when things got handled, you were safer because of it. While he was getting his hair cut, a young kid came in. Couldn't have been more than 16. He was selling newspapers. Bumpy bought one, gave the kid $1, told him to keep the change. The kid looked at the dollar like it was 100, said thank you 3 times. Bumpy nodded. The barber watched the whole thing. After the kid left, he said something. He said that the kid's father worked for Triano, that he'd lost his job when the operation shut down, that the family was struggling. Bumpy didn't respond right away. He just sat there, thinking. Then he asked where the father was now. The barber said he was looking for work, that he was a good man, just got caught up with the wrong people. Bumpy asked for the address. The barber wrote it down. 2 days later, the father had a job, working in a warehouse that Bumpy owned. The father never knew who gave him the job. He just knew that someone did, and that was enough, because that's how Bumpy operated. He didn't just punish. He didn't just destroy. He built. He protected.
He made sure that when he moved against someone, it was surgical, targeted, precise. The guilty suffered. The innocent were spared. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they were helped. That's what separated him from men like Triano. Triano saw power as a hammer, something you use to break things. Bumpy saw power as architecture, something you use to build systems that lasted, systems where people knew their place, where respect flowed both ways, where the rules were clear and the consequences were certain. You could live well in Bumpy's Harlem. You could thrive. You could build a business, raise a family, walk the streets at night without fear. But you couldn't cross certain lines, and everyone knew where those lines were, because Bumpy had drawn them in blood years before. Not his own blood, the blood of men who thought they were untouchable, men who thought Harlem was weak, men who thought a black man, no matter how smart or strong, would eventually bow to the families. They were all gone now, some dead, some disappeared, some just quietly retired and never spoke about what happened. And the ones who remained did so because they learned. They adapted. They understood that Harlem wasn't territory to be conquered. It was a kingdom, and kingdoms had kings. In 1958, there was no question who that king was. BumpyJohnson sat on that throne not because he was the most violent, but because he was the most intelligent, the most patient, the most willing to wait for the right moment and strike with precision. That night in the car with Triano wasn't luck. It was decades of reputation compressed into a single moment. It was every decision he'd ever made proving itself in real time. It was the understanding that fear, real fear, doesn't come from what you've done. It comes from what everyone knows you're capable of doing. And Bumpy Johnson was capable of anything, but he chose restraint, not out of weakness, out of strategy. Because dead men can't spread messages. Broken men can. Terrified men can. Men who lie awake at night wondering if tonight's the night someone comes for them. Those men tell stories. And stories, in that world, were more powerful than bullets. Months passed. Harlem stayed quiet. The numbers ran smooth. The clubs stayed open. The streets stayed safe. And Bumpy's daughter walked home from school every day without looking over her shoulder. That was all that mattered. Everything else was just noise. Years later, after Bumpy was gone, people still told that story. About the night a man sat in a car and ended a war before it started. About the two men who followed a little girl and disappeared into obscurity. About the message that echoed through every family in New York, that Harlem wasn't for sale, and the man who ran it couldn't be bought, broken, or bullied. Some people said Bumpy was ruthless. Others said he was a protector. Both were true, because in his world, you couldn't be one without the other. Mercy without strength was weakness. Strength without mercy was tyranny. Bumpy walked the line between them every single day, and he never fell.
That's the difference between power and violence. Violence is loud. It's desperate. It's what weak men use when they've run out of options. Power is silent. It's the ability to end someone's world with a conversation, to make them disappear without ever raising your hand. Bumpy Johnson understood that better than anyone. He didn't need to prove he was dangerous. Everyone already knew. And the ones who forgot, they learned fast. Or they didn't learn at all. Because in his world, there were no second lessons, just consequences. And consequences didn't negotiate. They didn't compromise. They didn't fade. They stayed with you. Forever. That's what Triano learned in the back of that car. That's what Chin learned at that dinner. That's what everyone who ever thought about testing Bumpy eventually understood. You could challenge him, but you'd lose. Not because he was invincible, but because he was prepared. Always. For everything. And preparation, in the end, beats talent, beats strength, beats ambition. Every single time. If you want to hear more stories about the men who built empires in the shadows, leave a comment. There are names you've never heard, moves you've never seen, moments that changed everything without anyone noticing. And they're all waiting